Hello, brothers and sisters. Today we shall talk about seeds from Satan, mafia from Monsanto. Yes, genetically modified seeds, indeed conceived as a weapon, and you will shortly see why. GM seeds and GM food carry great risks for all nations, so much so that for many reasons it is probably imperative these foods be banned outright. This subject is too large to be discussed here, but one aspect requires brief notice. And as you will realize, we will be discussing some very concerning things. If we were to ask about the origin of GM seeds, how the idea was conceived and developed, who did the research and who provided the funding, how would we reply? We might reasonably suggest that perhaps the concept originated in the biology or agricultural department of some university, or that a government lab doing research on food supplies might have conceived and pursued the idea. Or we might suggest a private company in the agricultural field was looking for more productive varieties of grains and stumbled on this process. But Satan was always interested in seeds, genetically modified seeds. So, GM seed was conceived, promoted, researched, and funded by the US DoD, the American War Department. Believe it or not, GM seed was never meant as a way to feed the hungry, but was instead conceived and developed as a weapon, a bioweapon, or more precisely, as a weapons delivery system. GM seed was never intended to support human life, but to eliminate it. That is Satan's strategy number one. So when you hear about GM seeds and crops being promoted, you know who and what the agenda is behind it all. GM seed is neither more productive nor healthier than traditional crops and is far more expensive and destructive. But it presents almost irresistible military advantages against any nation that becomes dependent on this source of food grains. One is that the US can use it as a political weapon, refusing to supply seed to a disfavored nation, perhaps causing widespread famine and dislocation, which I'm sure we shall be seeing in the near future. The other is more sinister, in that many groups have experimented with gene splicing technology, inserting unrelated DNA into various seeds, and we may add species, both animals and plants. In one case in Canada, a government department discovered an antifreeze gene contained in the blood of fish living in Arctic waters, permitting them to survive in waters of sub zero temperature. The scientists spliced this gene, that means they isolated the gene, into and they transplanted it into Canadian wheat crops, permitting the wheat to withstand freezing temperatures without damage. Monsanto also forced these genes into tomatoes, resulting in the first GMO tomato. An American research lab spliced the genes from fireflies into tobacco plants, producing a tobacco field that glowed in the dark. Yea, these examples may be harmless, but others are much less so. The US DoD has invested huge sums in research directed to splicing lethal genes into these GM crop seeds, including mm, mm, and the plague, That one and more. As a military weapon, such science is priceless. Why begin a shooting war when Monsanto or Cargill can sell rice, corn, and soybeans that contains mm, or a mm? When the seed is harvested and passes into the nation's food supply, it could within weeks exterminate 50% or more of the population without firing a single shot. And this was precisely the reason GMC, behind whom was Satan, was conceived and developed by the Americans. It is a weapon of war and nothing less, designed and meant to deliver to a nation's entire population a lethal mhm, or other disease, to literally exterminate an enemy with no risk to the aggressor. Many scientists and US military documents have demonstrated that seeds are far cheaper and much more effective than BOMBS in the search for military domination. One such military document discussed elsewhere stated the cost per death of an enemy population by nuclear, conventional, and biological weapons, the latter being orders of magnitude less than the former. Now, this one, this Epicide Biolab, which we shall be going into some greater detail. In 2001, scientists at the Epicide Biolab in San Diego created a GM contraceptive corn, having discovered a rare class of human antibodies that attack sperm. And we're talking about human sperm. The researchers isolated the genes that regulate the manufacture of these antibodies and inserted them into corn plants, creating horticultural factories that make contraceptives. Shortly after the 2001 Epicide press release, all discussion of the breakthrough vanished. But the seed did not vanish. The company was taken over by Biolex, and nothing more was heard in any media about the development of the spermicidal corn. Epicide, DuPont, and Syngenta, sponsors of the Svalbard Seed Vault, which we shall be discussing below, had a joint venture to share and use this technology. Silvia Ribeiro of the NGO ETC Group warned in a column in the Mexican daily La Giornata that the potential of spermicidal corn as a biological weapon is very high and reminisced about the use of forced sterilizations against indigenous peoples. Now, the Doomsday Seed Vault at Svalbard in Norway. A new and serious cause for concern is the recently announced seed vault built on a piece of barren rock named Svalbard, which is owned by Norway, is very remote near the North Pole and virtually inaccessible. According to press releases, the seed vault has dual blast proof doors with motion sensors, two airlocks, and walls of steel reinforced concrete 1 meter thick. There are no full time staff, but the vault's relative inaccessibility will facilitate monitoring any human activity. The stated purpose is to store the entire world's heritage seeds so that crop diversity can be saved for the future. So they say, but that crop diversity is already saved, stored in other vaults all around the world. What do these people foresee? That such a remote and secure facility should be developed. The promoters and financiers of this venture are the same people who control the world's GM seeds and who have been among the most outspoken proponents of drastically reducing the world's population. That one and that foundation, Syngenta, DuPont, Monsanto, and CGIAR. These are the same people who are actively destroying crop diversity all over the planet. Why would they suddenly get religious and decide to save in Norway the same seeds that are destroying everywhere else? Some time ago, William Engdahl wrote an excellently researched article on the subject of the seed vault and arrived at the same conclusion that the vault was created as a storehouse for lethal biological weapons, the DNA of which can be combined with GM seed and unleashed anywhere with the help of the same seed companies. No other use would explain the list of participants or the need for the remote location and virtually nuclear proof security. Engdahl asked, is it a coincidence that these same organizations from Norway to the that foundation to the World Bank are also involved in this Svalbard seed bank project? No coincidence there. So, now we have a related article about the epicide gene. Now, why do some GM crops contain the epicide gene? What is the epicide gene? And that the corn that you see in the picture is unfortunately one of their victims, which has been extensively genetically modified. While there are many harmless, genetically modified crops that have been around for centuries, bananas, just one, there are others that have the potential to cause irreversible sterility. Those crops, those GM crops contain the epicide gene. So whenever you see epicide, you can immediately connect that with irreversible sterility in your mind. What is the epicide gene? The epicide gene named for the corporation that created it. Epicide Pharmaceuticals, sorcery companies, which we read in Revelation chapter 18, verse 23, whereby the nations were deceived by sorceries. All the nations of the earth bought into it. Activates a rare class of antibodies that attack sperm. How did Epicide Pharmaceuticals do this? By isolating the genes that regulate the manufacture of these spermicidal antibodies. But, unlike other forms of pharmaceutical birth control, once a man or woman has been affected or infected by the epicide gene, it is permanent. So, this is a process very similar to what is happening on a global scale with the, what, that global experiment. All right, the end game is the same, to taint, to corrupt the human DNA. But with this epicide gene, it's a very specific goal. It's the fertility of the human race that's being impacted. There is no known way to reverse its effect because once the epicide gene has been incorporated into the human genome, we don't know how to remove it. So, the evidence. The Austrian government, via the Austrian Agency for Health and Food Safety, sponsored a long term, multi generational feeding study that confirmed the findings of previous and following studies, feeding mice with GM corn developed by Monsanto Corporation that led to lower fertility and body weight. The laboratory mice were split into two groups. One group was fed a diet containing 33% of a GM variety corn, and the other group was fed a closely related non-GM variety used in many countries. There were significant decreases in both litter size and pub weight in the third and fourth generation litters when comparing the mice fed GM corn and those fed non-GM corn. Professor Zentek, the lead author of the study, believes that there is a direct link between the decrease in the mice subjects' fertility and the GM diet. The mice who were fed non-GM corn continued to reproduce normally. So what does this have to do with us humans? We'll be seeing soon in a minute. This was not the only study to reach the same conclusion. Another long-term multi-generational study conducted jointly by the National Association for Gene Security and the Institute of Ecological and Evolutionary Problems in Russia found that feeding hamsters GM soy resulted in complete sterility after 3 generations. For your information, 95% of all the world's soy is genetically modified, and many of us are drinking soy milk, not to mention the fact that they are giving it to young infant males. No wonder the, um, the gender identity problems that occur. One of the study's author, Dr. Shurov, had this to say: we selected several groups of hamsters, kept them in pairs in cells, and gave them ordinary food as always. We did not add anything for one group, but the other was fed with soya that contained no GM components, while the third group, so they had a control group, while the third group was given some content of GM modified organisms, and the fourth one with increased amount of GMO. We monitored their behavior and how they gain weight, and when they give birth to their cubs. Originally, everything went smoothly. However, we noticed quite a serious effect when we selected new pairs from their cubs and continued to feed them as before. So this is the second generation that were chosen. These pairs' growth rate was slower and reached their sexual maturity slowly. When we got some of their cubs, we formed the new pairs of the third generation. Listen to this. We failed to get cubs from these pairs, which were fed with GM foodstuffs. It was proved that these pairs lost their ability to give birth to their cubs, which is why there was an article circulating that humans may be extinct by the year 2045. And one can easily understand after the second and third generation of having children who have been fed genetically modified food, the outcome is that the third generation will fail to have offspring. They would have lost their ability to give birth to their children instead of cubs. Do you understand? After 3 generations, humans will be unable to reproduce. It doesn't happen immediately. The scientists were further astonished to discover that the sterile third generation hamsters had also grown hair in their mouths. They have yet to determine how or why this happened. GM crops were first introduced in the 1970s, and since that time, sperm counts among the world's human male population have declined as much as 40 to 50%, according to some studies. GM foods may be just one factor causing the decreasing sperm levels. However, the most illustrious scientists on the planet have warned against the consumption of GM foods, and the whole of the EU has GMO labeling laws in place, which led to the economic banishment of such foods from their grocery shelves. But not everyone is concerned. Some believe that GMOs are beneficial and that any problems they may cause are outweighed by the good that they may do. Keep in mind that none of these studies are closely guarded secrets. At this point in time, everyone and their uncle knows what the data has revealed and have chosen to either believe or dismiss the findings. So, who are these optimists that believe GM crops are a boon to all mankind? Apparently, US politicians across party lines, companies that profit from GM crops, scientists who'll agree with anything if the price is right, and one philanthropic billionaire who fears the overpopulation of the earth. It's the same guy who is behind the global experiment that's going around, the guy in the glasses who loves to wear the pink sweatshirt and speaks with flailing arms. Do you know, the guy who's connected to Microsoft? It's not hard to guess why politicians are pro GMOs. When power and money are at stake, you can always count on a politician to screw over their constituents to ensure they maintain access to both. Make no mistake, your representatives only care what the wealthy and powerful, whose money they require to remain viable candidates in today's world, think about policies that affect all of our lives. The real question is, what do the wealthy, powerful, and seemingly philanthropic, well, that billionaire comes to mind again, have to gain by promoting and protecting GM crops? For as long as I can remember, the wealthy and influential have publicly wrung their hands and cried that the world was becoming overpopulated, always that same argument, and that soon there would not be enough food and water for everyone. But actually, it's for them that they're concerned. That's not a mistake. Now, some are claiming that overpopulation is causing global warming, lies, lies, and more lies, and the possible end of human civilization. One of the most prominent members of the power elite making these overpopulation equals global warming claims is none other than the guy to whom we were referring previously. And this is what he said during that infamous TED Talk. The world today has 6.8 billion, that's headed up to about 9 billion. Now, if we do a really good job on new things, healthcare, reproductive health services, we could lower that by perhaps 10 or 15%. So, yes, you should be scratching your head. And there's no such thing as safe things. So, and mighty would be lining up their offspring to receive the injections, and that's where we are at right now. So, and then it goes into, yes, promoting these things to the third world, because the guy with the guy with the glasses who has always been interested in third world countries. And this is the press release that I wanted to show you, created by that foundation. So President Obama, as chair of GG8, announced support for a range of efforts to increase the productivity and nutrition of smallholder farmers. He also launched a new Alliance for Nutrition and Food Security, an agricultural development program partnering donors with African countries and the private sector. So this is basically showing their unusual interest in third world countries and their their their, um, their desire to introduce GM seeds and crops into third world countries. And we can readily understand what the underlying goal is. In case you didn't know, the G8 is comprised of these countries listed here. So it's also worth remembering that most of these countries have GMO labeling laws that put the countries listed above in the G8. So if these countries won't be consuming GMO food, where is this GMO food being redirected to? Hmm? Look, yet here they are supporting GMOs in Africa. Why? Who benefits? You are, of course, welcome to draw your own conclusions, and so have I. So, I wanted to show you some relevant Bible verses about this subject. So that's Luke 17, verse 26. And we all know now that we are indeed in those days, in the days of Noah. And as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man. Transhumanism has already started. It has started even before this global experiment has started. When I say the global experiment, I'm referring about the plastic syringe with the sharp needle attached to it. It will not be done through interbreeding. It will be done through gene splicing and implants. Now let's go to Leviticus 19 and we go to verse 19. Gene editing is an abomination. Any modification of seeds' germ cells is considered a failure to unconditionally welcome God's gift and ultimately a form of harming this life. Using this understanding, any form of germline genetic editing is seen as a clear rebellion, disrespect, and harm of God's creation. Because after all, God's creation is God's gift to humans. And in Leviticus chapter 19, verse 19, we read, Ye shall keep my statutes. Thou shalt not let thy cattle gender with a diverse kind. Thou shalt not sow thy field with mingled seed, neither shall a garment mingled of linen and woolen come upon thee. And in Leviticus 18, we read something similar, and that's verse 23. Neither shalt thou lie with any beast, to defile thyself therewith. Neither shall any woman stand before a beast to lie down thereto. It is confusion. And because many of us have inadvertently eaten such GMO foods, because we were unaware of these seed wars, where Satan has been waging war on us through seeds and food. We are now faced with a lot of immunological reactions, lactose intolerance, gluten sensitivity manifestations, both inside the gastrointestinal tract and out of the gastrointestinal tract in other organs in the body, notably the joints, thyroid, brain, including the cerebellum, and skin. For example, a condition that's related to gluten that manifests in the skin is called dermatitis herpetiformis, to name a few. Now, Deuteronomy, chapter 22, and we go to verse 9. Thou shalt not sow thy vineyard with diverse seeds, lest the fruit of thy seed, which thou hast sown, and the fruit of thy vineyard be defiled. Thou shalt not plough with an ox and an ass together. Thou shalt not wear a garment of diverse sorts, as of woolen and linen together. You should also know that even hybrids between two different species of domesticated animals, say dogs, okay? So, different species of dogs are a hybridity that is condemned by God, because you may think that all dogs are the same, but you also know that there are different species of dogs. Okay? So we are not supposed to mix a species of a particular dog with another species. And what comes to mind right now is that abomination looking dog, the one which looks like a dog that has been a cross between a dog and a pig, the French bulldog, pug mix. That is for me, that is the ultimate abomination. I'm sorry if you own one as a pet, but species shouldn't be mixed between themselves, even though they're dogs, but they are different species. Now, some people might argue that human races shouldn't mix between themselves. That would classify, in my humble opinion, as race as being racist, because human races, Caucasian, African, Asian, are just that. They are races. They are not different species. They are not different species, I repeat. So, there is, in my humble opinion, I repeat again, there is nothing wrong with a Caucasian woman marrying an African male, because even though they are different races, they are of the same species. Alright, so if somebody comes with that argument, you will know how to counteract. So, Genesis, of course, chapter 1, verse 11. And God said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. So the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind. Galatians, chapter 6, verse 7. Be not deceived. God is not mocked, for whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. And we are seeing the consequences of what is being sown, that shall he also reap. We are approaching the end here. Genesis 1:24. And God said, let the earth bring forth a living creature, after his kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beasts of the earth, after his kind. And it was so. Note that the words after his kind is repeated twice there. And verse 25, and God made the beasts of the earth after his kind, and cattle after their kind, and everything that creepeth upon the earth after his kind. And God saw that it was good. And note that in that verse, after his kind is repeated another three times. Luke chapter 8, verse 11. And I decided to include this verse because the word seed has a dual meaning for us. Now the parable is this. Verse 11 reads, the seed is the word of God. So as Satan is desirous of corrupting the seed in the natural realm, so will he try to corrupt the word of God. He has he has succeeded corrupting some versions of the Bible. And a notable example comes to mind about the mark of the beast being on the skin, being on the forehead and on the right hand, rather in the right hand and in the forehead. And our last verse, Ezekiel 44:18. They shall have linen bonnets upon their heads, and shall have linen breeches upon their loins. They shall not gird themselves with anything that causeth sweat. They are not to mix fibers, that they are not to mix that they are not to weave fibers, mixed fibers and woven together, because that will cause problems in the skin from sweating. So our Lord God takes care of us and knows what's best for us to wear as well. So I hope that you find this article and Bible study interesting. This channel is heavily shadow banned. Subscribe, like and share, and God bless you all.